Welcome back. We're looking at the subject of the Christian and personal riches, and we're going to look at it in prophecy. Well, today, I want to move on and spend a lot of time at what happened at Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is very, very significant to the Israelites and should be significant to us as well, because it's on Mount Sinai that God revealed himself to the Israelites. Well, up until this time, God was known by his actions, and God was made known through Moses, particularly as he confronted the power and the person of the Pharaoh of Egypt. Because it was Pharaoh who boasted, "Who is God that I should listen to him?" When Moses came to him and said, "Let my people go," this was Pharaoh's arrogant response. Who is God that I should listen to him? Well, we'll see in the chapters that follow that exactly who Pharaoh was dealing with, what God it was that he was so arrogantly comparing himself to. He found out because God released his people from their slavery with a mighty hand through plagues, and all kinds of terrible things happened in Egypt. God revealed himself to Pharaoh. So he found out that God was mighty and God was with the Israelites. So up until this time, we see that God had revealed himself really only to Moses in the burning bush. Well, Moses saw God as he revealed himself very up close and personal. But to the Israelites, they had only heard of him through Moses, and through their elders they heard some things, but they didn't really have an experience, an up close and personal experience with God, until he agreed to come down and appear on Mount Sinai, and that's in the 19th chapter. Let's look at verse 1. In the third month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert of Sinai. Now, what I want to mention about this is that they were in the desert. They were in the desert. They were in a hard place. God promised to bring them into the promised land. But it's the 3 months had gone by, and they're in a desert. Now, why is this? They might be asking themselves, why, God, did you bring us out of Egypt with the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey, and here we are sitting in the desert? Well, the desert is a place of testing, isn't it? But God had uniquely prepared these people for the desert because he, through his permissive will, allowed them to be put into hard labor and mistreatment by Pharaoh. Why? Well, there were reasons. I mentioned suffering last time as one of them, but here's another one. Because it made them hardened to these kinds of severe conditions that the desert presents. It made them a hardened people, a tough people, a rugged people. Even so, it was still the desert. And it was a place of hardship, and it wasn't a place of peace and comfort. So we think of, oh God, you promised us this heaven, and there things in heaven are so wonderful, and why am I here in this very, very tough place? Perhaps you're experiencing poverty right now. Perhaps you're experiencing great financial hardship. And so this message of Christians and their personal riches is very enticing to you because you think money is going to solve your problem. It doesn't solve your problem. Only God can solve your problem. But maybe it's time for us, or the one going through the hardship, maybe it's time right now when we have to suck it up and endure patiently the thing we're going through, believing and trusting in God, and then watching, waiting for God to move in a mighty way to deliver us. And he does. He promises he will deliver us from much trouble. He didn't say when, didn't say how soon. It has to do with us a lot. It has to do with our faith. It has to do with our trust in God. Because we can delay things by worrying about them and plotting and planning and all of these things that are just fruitless and endless. We can hasten God's deliverance simply by having great faith in God. In the 19th chapter again, it tells us in verse 3, and Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, this is God speaking, this is what you are to say to the house of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. Who are the people of Israel? Let me remind you again, they are the descendants of Abram, those that God promised to Abram. God said, I'll make nations come from you. I will make you into a mighty nation. This is the formation of a nation that's going on here, right in this chapter. The formation of a kingdom, of a people. What makes up a kingdom? What makes up a kingdom? What makes up a nation? A nation is formed by people. People make up a nation. But that's not all. Other things make up a nation, such as land. Nations are made up of land, are they not? Land with borders. Some have wonderful land and others maybe not always so wonderful. But nations are made up of land. What else makes up a nation? How about a ruler, a leader, authority, a king? King makes up a nation or a kingdom. And the last thing is laws. A nation is made up, has to have laws. That's what nations are about. A system, each of them have a system of laws. So here is God speaking to Abram's descendants. You yourselves, verse 4, have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Oh, how good the Lord is, how he gave them release from their captivity, from their slavery, gave them a release. He carried them through the desert on eagle's wings. He brought you. He says, I brought you to myself. And where did he plop them down at? Next to Sinai, the very place that God promised Moses that he would bring Moses and the people. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, out of all the nations, you will be my treasured possession. You have your treasured possession. You have that box with some family treasures in it. You have that, maybe a chest that has some very, some coins, old coins, or riches in it, gold, silver, so on. You have those treasures. God looks at treasured possessions and he sees people. You are my treasured possessions, he says. And I have, even though the whole earth is mine, you will be for me my treasured possessions. You will be for me a kingdom and priests and a holy nation. This is where God's going. This is prophecy. Understand it. There is prophecy here that is going to be fulfilled. It is yet to be fulfilled, but the kingdom is in the making. You will be for me a kingdom and priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. That was God's word to Moses to pass on. You will be for me a treasured possession. Do you know that you are a treasured possession of God? You are that jewel. You are the gems of God. Why is it that it's repeated so many times, fear God, keep his commandments? Fear God, because you understand it's a matter of authority. What keeps us in line, oftentimes, with the authorities in our life? What keeps us in line? What keeps a child in line, often with his parents? Because if they step out of line, then they're fearful of the consequences. The fear of God will keep us from sinning. And when the fear of God is preached out of our lives, if it's taught that we should not have to fear God, that's not right, fearing God. Yes, it is. It is mandatory. It is the beginning of our relationship. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of God is right. We must fear God. But on that basis, fear alone, we're not perfected, because fear has to do with punishment. But perfect love for God takes away all fear. We have to continue this topic, but I want you to hear these important points. Fear of God has to do with the warnings in the Bible. If we don't hear the warnings, if we don't heed the warnings, we will understand why we should have feared God. We will experience the wrath of God. But if we obey the warnings, heed them, and obey God's laws, we will experience the promises and the great, awesome love of God. These are great and precious promises that God has, but they are for those who obey him. And I'm afraid so much of this Christian and their personal riches teaching that we hear today omits, leaves out completely the fear of God, so that we will not even hear the warnings. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.